Well, good morning and afternoon, depending on where you are. Thank you so much for joining me for our third day of National Farm Health and Safety Week. My name is Natalie, and I'll be your presenter today. Today, we are talking about how to train on the farm, including your family. This should be a great topic for you today. As I mentioned, my name is Natalie Gupton, and I'm the Director of Business Services and Industry Relations for AgSafe. Our organization is based out of Modesto, California, and I'm all the way on the other side of the country in Louisville, Kentucky. So we work nationally. You can check us out on social media, posting a lot of information, and I will try to get this recording posted on social media today. And check out our website also, lots of great information and resources on there at agsafe.org. And don't want to forget about mentioning our wonderful sponsor, the wonderful company who has made this week possible for you, providing all of these great sessions free of charge. So thank you, the wonderful company. So take a moment, I want you to review the disclaimer, and then we will dive in and get started. Okay, training. I don't know about you, but I always love participating in trainings because it just brings issues top of mind. It gets the juices going, and I get a little bit more creative and think about things in a different way. Some of the things when we sit in training, such as this webinar, you probably already know, but it helps, again, bring it top of mind and refocus and hear it from a different perspective. And with safety is about training. And to be able to be safe, you've got to know the proper way to do things, whether it's to drive a tractor, hook up an implement, fill a grain bin, enter a grain bin, navigate around a manure pit. There's so many things to consider on a farm. And the first line of defense that you have as a farmer, a farm owner, farm manager, safety and compliance person is training. And so today we want to talk about some of the key points that you want to keep in mind when you're working through developing a training or doing a training, even if it's just with a family member. Because again, that is your first line of defense for accident prevention, or some people like to say incident prevention. So two things to consider. You want to have careful preparation in knowing your audience. You know, whether you're a large farming operation, you're small and you have a couple employees, or you just have a couple relatives, it's you and your brother, it's you and your adult children working on the farm, it's still important to include training and have careful preparation. And by preparation, I mean, think about what you have to do and what you're asking those people that work for you or you're working with to do. Make a list out the equipment that you're going to be asking those people to use, make a list of the type of tasks that you're going to have them do, and having those listed out, even as a small family farm, you're more prepared to get somebody ready to do a task to do it safely, properly, and efficiently. And and knowing your audience is important. If you have a brand new employee, think about the experience that they had. Did they come from a different operation? Are they completely brand new? First time they've got their foot stepped in a manure, new to the farm. Think about who you are going to be training and the experiences that they have so that you can cater what you're going to train them or how you're going to train them according to those experiences. And think about your family members. Have you been working with them for 10 years already? Do you have a good relationship with them? Do they respect you? And I say that a little facetiously, but, knowing father and son relationships, father-daughter, mother-son, sometimes they can get a little convoluted with personal feelings, different experiences and ages, and, experience with technology versus, hands-on experience on the farm. So taking those things in consideration is important because as you prepare what you are going to do with them, you've got to take all those pieces to have an effective training. Next, again, going back to knowing your audience, if possible, you've got to think about learning styles. Now, I don't want to get too scientific or heavy into this topic, but if you know the people that you're training, whether it's your employee or as a family member, think about how that individual learned or might learn. There are three main sensory receivers. It's visual, audio, and kinesthetic. And those translate into see, hear, and do. And so learners maybe have a mixture of all three of these, but one of these will overpower the other. So I think about, myself as a learner. I know that I learn best by seeing. I think about my husband, who actually works or learns better by audio. So he has to hear things and he can repeat it for years, where me, I would have to see it to actually internalize the topic. And then kinesthetic means touching and doing. And I think a lot of people, this is probably their number two, if not their number one, and actually touching and doing what was explained to them. But a mixture of all these three receivers make an effective training. So taking those things into consideration, do you need to explain it? Do you need to show them? And then do they need to actually do it themselves? And honestly, no matter what that learning style is for that individual, a combination of all of those three things will be highly effective. Give you some information here. I always find this extremely interesting that people generally remember 10% of what they read, 20% of what they hear, 30% of what they see, 50% of what they hear and see, 70% of what they say and write, and finally, 90% of what they show, say, and do. So participation is key in any type of training that you do. And again, don't get me wrong, if we're thinking about this small family farm, I'm not talking about having this formal classroom, having PowerPoint, all these things. That's fantastic, but I'm being realistic. But if you're able to incorporate any of these things, or all three of these learning styles into a demonstration and a learning session for your worker, then it's going to be effective. If you're thinking about training on the tractor, first you want to probably explain and talk about the proper way and safely to operate a tractor and get it started. Then you want to show them. And then finally, you want to have them demonstrate it to you. And then you can look for ways that that individual can improve. And so it can be that simple. And again, the important thing here is to take into consideration how that individual learns best. Next, language and literacy. It is important that employers, farmers, trainers, must have a system for communicating with employees about safety, policies, and procedures in a form that they can readily understand. I'm not saying, again, if you're a small farm, you don't have to have all these crazy documents, which is nice, and it's nice to have those formal things, but being realistic, knowing what you need to do to help your worker understand and keep safety top of mind. So is the language understood? And this can mean a variety of things. One, if you have a bilingual employee, sometimes things don't translate one for one. They may speak mostly fluent English, but however, sometimes things can get a little lost in translation, so to speak, because sometimes it's not a part of the Spanish language or their culture. So considering that and having those open conversations with your employees sometimes and having them ask questions if they don't understand is important. Also, I know individuals that, yes, they have a domestic English-speaking worker, however, they may have limited literacy. And so taking those things into consideration, whether you have posters, if you do have any forms or policies that you may provide to them in writing, understand that they may not be able to read it in its entirety. And so taking that into consideration as well when you're communicating with employees and if you're incorporating them into your training and having a training program. And make sure that they understand your written warnings, messages, or that they understand illustrations. So on this next screen here, I have universal symbols. So this was pulled from a Kubota tractor manual. All things considered, you have somebody that is perfectly fluent in English, well educated, doesn't have any language barriers, so on and so forth. It doesn't necessarily mean they know what all these symbols mean when they're looking at a tractor or reading through an operator's manual. And so one, making sure that you understand what they are, but taking the time to point them out to those individuals so that they understand what some of these symbols mean. Don't take for granted that they understand what the fuel level means. Don't take it for granted that they know that the headlights are on low or high. And taking the time to walk through some of these basic things is important. And sometimes some of these things can be overlooked easily when thinking about a training and walking through somebody for tractor operation, for example. Okay, so on this screen, kind of reiterating some of the things I've already talked about, but your workers and including family members will have differences in work experience, learning skills, and interest. So again, talking about knowing your audience and design preparations and materials that everyone can understand. And here in my notes, I uh, jokingly put not happening, LOL. I'm thinking of my father who has a handful of employees. He is not designing materials and he is not making a presentation. However, he does know his audience. He knows how to explain things and he knows how to show them how to do things. He takes the time to explain it, knowing how those individuals learn, that he takes that into consideration. If you are a large farming operation, you have several employees, I would probably suggest actually having some physical materials and potentially having some presentations. It's, two extremes. Are you falling under OSHA regulations and have extreme regulatory oversight? I know our friends in California, you have to navigate a lot of different regulatory issues versus other folks in other states that don't have as much of that burden. So knowing that as well, you've got to take these things into consideration when you're training folks on various topics. Train in ways that involve workers. So going back to the family farm, thinking about from that perspective and knowing your audience also, if you don't think your child is going to receive the information from you very well, and you have a great worker that you trust and know does a great job, potentially you would be better served to have that individual, that trusted worker, train your child on a particular task, because they're probably might respect that individual more than you and be more receptive of the information than coming from a parent. Conversely, if you have several employees, involve them throughout the training process and assign folks to design a training program. And again, it doesn't have to be extremely complicated or formal, but assign someone to train on tractor operation and have them think about what they would do when they get a new individual under them, how to operate a tractor, and then have them show that to you and you approve it, then they are involved entirely throughout the process of training. And so having other individuals involved also helps with the ownership and pride that they take in their work. And hopefully that will be emulated throughout the entire operation, because if they know that they're trusted and they are expected to do it the right way, they are ultimately going to hopefully consider carry that work ethic throughout the time of their employment with you and carry that on through the people that they train as well. And I probably should highlight and bold and underline, be practical and get to the point. It doesn't have to be long. It doesn't have to be complicated. Ultimately, just do something. Train, teach, explain. Again, it's your first line of defense for safety and efficiency, and knowing how to do things properly at the end of the day gets things done faster. So be practical in your training deliveries. Again, talking about my dad with his 2 employees, he's not doing a large presentation and giving them a booklet and worksheets. He's not doing that. That is completely impractical for his operation. But him taking the time to explain a new piece of equipment, having his senior employee show a new employee how to do a task or work on a lawnmower motor. Those things are important. And you have to take all these pieces into consideration to develop the right type of training for your operation. Also, think about how your trainings are going to differ depending on the tasks that you're training on. You're training for emptying a manure pit is going to be a lot different than training somebody on how to work on a small engine, for example. So one's probably going to be much more in depth and much more hands-on and a lot more oversight before they're let loose to do on their own. And so again, being practical in your expectations and in the delivery of your training is essential. Going right into, from being practical to making sure that you're doing it the right time and in the right place. You want to consider your work schedule, what time of day would be a great time to actually conduct a training. You want to avoid distractions and make sure that you have all the tools necessary. Thinking about the right time and place, be consistent. If you get a brand new employee, you're not going to be able to train them on everything that they need to know on your operation in the first 2 days. Prioritize, think about what's most important, what is that individual going to need to do immediately, and start with those and then break everything out. For example, you may think about, I'm going to train my new employee for 30 minutes after lunch every Monday on a new thing. That's completely realistic. Doing everything at once, people are going to get overloaded, overwhelmed, and they're not going to remember anything. Also, you as a trainer, you're going to get tired and overwhelmed also. So again, going back to the being practical. Of course, you want to train your folks while they're being paid. You want to make sure that you compensate them because they are working for you and they're taking time out of their personal life to work for you. And it's very much a part of the job. And so, of course, you want to train them during paid hours. You want to make sure that they're fresh and there's not any distractions around. At the beginning of the work shift may be realistic, but of course, especially during summer, that's the prime time to be working while it's cool. So you may think about doing it after a lunch break, but you want to ensure that that individual is primed and ready to absorb the information that you are providing. And then your training tools needed. Clearly, if you're training on a piece of equipment, you got to have the piece of equipment available. That's the obvious. But, if you're providing any videos or an instructional pieces, if you have an operator's manual that you want to review, you want to make sure that you have those ready and available when you are going to conduct your training. And like I said, it doesn't have to be complicated. Maybe one day you're just taking the operator's manual for the new UTV and going over some of the key safety points and potentially some of the maintenance items that you want to make sure are taken care of on a regular basis, and that's that individual's responsibility. And that could take 15 minutes. Again, going back to, as long as you're just doing something and talking about the right way to do things as well as the safe way to do things, bringing this into the part of your culture of your operation and your farm and your family will speak volumes. you know, thinking about your training toolbox, you know, where are you going to get your tools? Which training tools do you consider the most valuable? And what do you need to have available? You know, how often are you going to be training? You know, if you are a little bit larger operation and you are having formal trainings, you may want to have a training manual. You may want to have a checklist, and having these resources available to you, so that you can seamlessly train and onboard employees and have a method and be consistent for everyone that comes to work for you, would be recommended, because it does reduce the stress of, you know, keep getting an employee on board and working for you and trained. You know, thinking about the family farm, again, your tools could be the actual items that you're training on, but sometimes you may go back to, you know, thinking about the materials that you may need for the task. You may show them a YouTube video and be a part of your training program. Thinking about grain bin entry here in the Midwest as very much a part of the fall harvest process. You know, grain bin safety is extremely important, and talking about engulfment, clearly you can't show engulfment, but there's lots of great safety videos available online that will help demonstrate and reiterate that topic. And it could be as simple as showing that video and explaining it to your trainee, whether it's you know, family member or an actual employee. You know, think about of all the experiences that you've had when you're trying to learn something, and incorporate that into your training. You know, what was great, what was not so great. You know, thinking about when you were trying to learn something on the farm, when did you get frustrated and why did you get frustrated? And channel those things as you work through how you're going to train someone, because your experience is probably no different than what others have experienced as well, and considering those will help in creating an effective training program. And talking about here the 5 P's for training: purpose, preparation, presentation, participation, and paperwork. And just want to underscore the paperwork aspect, that even on the smallest of farms, it is a good idea to note when training had taken place. Should something happen, and God forbid you ever find yourself in litigation, but noting that a training had taken place and that individual had participated is a great idea. You know, conversely, for those large operations, you cannot document enough, from sign-in sheets to retaining training materials, having individuals sign out. All those things that you can do to document training had taken place are very important. So some ideas of training techniques. You know, family farms, forget the icebreaker. That's when you talk about how the family's doing and how, you know, Aunt Bonnie made the best pie last week at the church potluck. So that's your icebreaker on the family farm. But potentially, if you're getting new employees, you don't know much about them, you want them to be at ease and be comfortable and get to know them, because ultimately you're going to be working with them on such an intimate and regular basis. You want to have that human relationship. And then other things to consider as a part of your training: you know, illustrations, hands-on demonstrations, small group exercises. Again, that's for larger groups. Role play, and that could be just, you know, talking through getting a grain bin entry permit or a confined space permit, and when to talk through those points and what happens through that process. So that could be a role play situation. Games, discussion, and hazard hunts. And just to, again, reiterate the adult learning style and going back to the see, hear, and do, but also thinking of adult learning styles and these assumptions about adult learners. They are goal-oriented, they're ready to learn, they're internally motivated, experienced, problem-centered, and need-to-know basis. So when you are explaining things to your trainees, tell them why. Why are they doing this? Why is it important? Because if they don't understand why, it's going to be hard for them to internalize the information and put it into practice. And so the last slide here is 5 important points to remember that people learn at different rates. So you may need to actually repeat some of these items on a regular basis. And potentially, you know, if you're doing your training for 15, 30 minutes after lunch on Mondays, you go through your entire list, you may want to start all over and do it again. It just keeps information top of mind. The information to relate to the workplace and needs and realities. Clearly, you don't want to train on grain bin safety if you don't have grain on your farm. That's a little absurd example, but you get the point. Keep training straightforward, simple, and short as possible. Begin and end with the summary of the information and use interactive methods. And so involving the trainee, having them show you how to do things, have them repeat what you explained, are great ways to reinforce the information with them. And so with that, that concludes today's presentation. I know we only had a short time together. So thank you for joining us today. We have 2 more days. So tomorrow we're going to talk about emergency action plans, and Friday we'll be talking about sexual harassment prevention. Same time, same place. If you haven't already registered, you may do so on the AgSafe website, and it will provide the link to you to participate. We had a question about what is the 5th P for training, and Christina responded with paperwork, and that is correct. Thank you so much for helping me with that question. I will stay online if anybody has any more questions, but I thank you so much for your participation. And again, I want to thank the wonderful company for their support in sponsoring this week's webinar series. Again, thank you and have a wonderful and safe day.